signatory governments. They can also self-nominate, and then that list is then approved or not approved by the government of Bermuda, by the cabinet. It does that every year because we currently have 7 and 2 or 3 recyclers. They're 3-year terms. That's the geographical area of collaboration, and they asked BBNJ Article 19, paragraph 4. So those are the current signatories, and I say they're governments advisedly because some of them are not states, but the Azores, for example, is an independent part of Portugal, Bahamas, Bermuda, British Virgin Islands, those overseas territories, the UK, Canada, Cayman Islands, of course, as well, Dominican Republic, Monaco, United Kingdom, United States, and also right from the beginning, France and Sweden have been providing some report. That's a meeting we had to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Hamilton Declaration. I think you're not in it, Larry. Oh, Adrian was there, right, yeah, okay. And that's the current commissioner. So we have some of the Azores, President Roberts, who's here, Elizabeth McClanahan, who's American, Dr. Frank Muller-Karga, Senator Moore from Canada, Dr. Robbie Smith. We always have a Bermudian. He's our Bermudian. David Johnson, who's the former Executive Secretary of OSPAR, and Dr. Sandy, as you call herself, Sandy O'Neill from the British Virgin Islands. Did you want to? You're right. Okay, you're right. When we signed the declaration, and we had those of you who knew Christina Jurdy, we had a tribute to her, and she was actually there with us when we were negotiating it. And it's very prescient that in 2014 we used the word stewardship. Look at the bottom paragraph to recognise the importance of its high ecological and biological significance, guiding principle, conservation of the Sargasso Sea ecosystem for the benefit of present and future generations. Terminology which we also find in the BBNJ agreement at the bottom, exercise a stewardship role for the Sargasso Sea and to keep its health, productivity and resilience under review. So that's been aided particularly in the last 3 years now by funding from 2 organisations. One, the Global Environment Facility, which was a project which is in the jargon of the UN system, implemented by the UNDP and executed by IOC. We heard from Julien Barbert this morning, and also by the French facility for the global environment, for FEM. And that's the Sargasso project, which you saw the logo of the Sargasso project on every slide in the last 2 days. And this is what we're doing. And again, I did that very briefly. This is our modus operandi. I talked about this briefly yesterday. We're developing an ecosystem diagnostic. That's the baseline. And then on the basis of the information we capture and the threats we identify, we then negotiate this strategic action program, which will include conservation measures. We haven't decided what they'll be yet. We've got ideas, but they will have to be signed off by the stakeholders. I did want to say something about collaboration. There's a lot of players out there. So we have a lot of, the red is really what our arrangements with those organizations. So we've been working this for more than 10 years. So we've got a good system of good relations with most of the organizations which are active. And these are the fisheries organizations like ICAT, an MOU with them, and also with the Northwest Atlantic Fisheries Agreement. We have a representative from the Cartagena Convention, and she was saying that our MOU with them has expired, and it has to be done through Nairobi, and Nairobi are not the most, I can say this, can I, publicly, swift to reply, because we have tried a couple of times, but we're on good terms. So that, I won't go through all those. This is not working so well.
Yeah, right. Try this one.
Okay. Sorry. That was for yeah, you can hear me anyway. All right, so under the BBNJ agreement, we have to do consultation with the relevant stakeholders, all this wide range of bodies, look, as appropriate. Go back one? Yeah. Why? Oh, thank you. No. You're blowing me up. Sorry, can you put me up one more? No, back now, please. Let's have a back. You got a question on that? Yeah, right. I showed it. I have to move on because I've only got time. So 2 years ago, maybe the same time of the year, in Edinburgh, we had our first consultation. That's it. So Laura's in there. I think a number of other people here in that. That was our first with what we call the guardians, so people who are interested in looking after it. And we do have our stakeholder consultation consultant here, Kevin, who's going to can answer questions as well, I hope, if it comes up. All right. So the big news, which I'll also talk about tomorrow at the closing, is that the Bermuda government and the UK have taken the initiative to propose a Hamilton II, which is a second Hamilton Declaration, much wider in scope. So it's a new initiative. It's by them, not by us, although they obviously are consulting with us and want us to support. And it's will invite all the BBNJ parties, those states who've ratified or acceded to it, to an international meeting in Bermuda in the summer of this year. And they've circulated a draft declaration, which was drafted by a handful of states, which acknowledges the importance of conserving the Sargasso Sea, so business as usual, but also provides a mechanism for the signatories to signal political support for developing a collective ABMT proposal under the BBNJ agreement. I haven't decided what it is or what it'll be, but they're generally going to support it. And there's a draft declaration and the note verbal, the famous diplomatic paradox of sending out this written note verbal. That's been sent to all the BBNJ signatories, and there's going to be a side event in 2 weeks' time at the PrepCom, convened in the UK legation, to explain and to discuss a little bit more and to bring other players on. And that, unusually, this draft declaration will also provide an opportunity for non-government partners to sign up, which is something which we regret wasn't in the original. So I'm going to hand over to David Vousden, or do you have to be David to be on this team, to talk to us about the Socio-Ecosystem diagnostic analysis. And before that, you want to make an announcement?
I'm stealing the microphone just to make a quick announcement. Especially for those of you joining us online today, please join the Slido. So that's www.slido.com, and use the hashtag BBNJ2026 to ask questions that we hopefully can answer at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
And we have produced a couple of flyers for this to help you. One is just on our work program, the way we work, which should be summary of some things we've said, and then the threats. I'm going to leave that. They're pretty unfortunately predictable, aren't they? Climate change, plastic versus plastic. This one here, David. There you go. Just press up and down. This one goes forward and goes back.
Okay, you can hear me all right. I've been told it's a directional microphone, so I have to hold it like a rapper, I've been told. Yo. So how do we move on to the next? Do I just keep pressing? Do we get out of yours into mine?
Yeah. Should do. Yeah.
Yep. Actually, I'm going to stand over here because I can't see my own slides otherwise. So thanks everyone for turning up. I hope you find this all interesting. And welcome any questions at the end, of course, or any guidance or advice, indeed. You know, we don't know it all. So a socio-ecosystem diagnostic analysis, what is it? Well, it's evolved from a process that the Global Environment Facility and the United Nations have used for over 3 decades now, called the TDA-SAP process. The TDA stands for Transboundary Diagnostic Analysis, and the SAP stands for Strategic Action Program. We've changed ours to a CEDA rather than a TDA because the transboundary and transboundary diagnostic analysis refers to a political transboundary. So it's where you've got 8, 10, 14 countries all working together to produce a strategic action program. In this case, we're out in the high seas and the area beyond national jurisdiction, so we felt it was appropriate to change it to not just an ecosystem diagnostic analysis, but a socio-ecosystem diagnostic analysis, looking at the social aspects as well as the economic aspects. So what does it do? Well, it defines the environmental and socio-economic status of this area of the Sargasso Sea. David showed you the GAC, the Geographic Area of Collaboration. So it's looking at what is the actual status of the knowledge on oceanography, what is the status of our knowledge on the deep seas in this area, what do we know about charismatic and enigmatic fauna and flora in the area, including the Sargassum itself and what it supports. But it also identifies some of the gaps in that information. And the idea of the CEDA, and it's a big document, it's over 500 pages long, with an enormous amount of up-to-the-date, best available science. As it says there, it includes the scientific knowledge, threats, commercial pressures, global connectivity. Connectivity, there's a big section in it on connectivity, on how important vertical and horizontal connectivity is. And I won't labor on that because you'll see it in a few slides. It's accompanied by a causal chain analysis. We were going to show you the causal chain analysis, but that's about 30 or 40 pages of a table, and we ran into some problems with the person who was recording it for us who couldn't be here. So I'll just talk through that towards the end. And it represents, as it says there, the accumulated work of over 25 global experts over a period of more than 4 years. And that CEDA will feed into a strategic action program, which I will then talk about. Okay. Magic. It does it without me impressing. So the environmental status, what did we look at? Oceanographic findings, and these are some of the findings. Bear in mind that this is a huge document, so it's quite a lot of effort to actually whittle it down to this information I'm giving you in about 20 slides. So it's not detailed, but it is summarized nicely and it's accurate. So long-term monitoring, the Sargasso Sea have gone on with the BAT study, which was implemented by BIOS, and Hydrostation 2. Hydrostation and BATs have been going, well, since 1954 and 1988 to present. So it's one of the longest series of data collections of this kind anywhere in the world. And what the findings from this were are that the Sargasso Sea can act, oh gosh, it jumped, act as a sentinel for measuring changes in this kind of an environment, the climate change, etc. Okay, so moving on with the oceanographic findings, sea surface temperatures we found have risen by approximately 1.2 degrees centigrade since the 1970s, and that's down to between 200 and 400 meters, so it's quite substantial changes in temperature. And declining levels of dissolved oxygen, fallen by up to 8%, and increased acidification and salinity. And I think you mentioned that a little bit, David. It is a concern. And there you can see on the right-hand side the cycle and variability of surface temperature at the BAT station, with some of the earlier data from the Hydrostation S. And yeah, I think we can move on to the next slide, which I can do. There we go. In terms of other oceanographic findings, variability in nutrient levels, we're finding quite a lot of variation in nutrient levels over the years, and changes to the plankton community, which are almost certainly associated with that variability in nutrient levels. Primary production within the area, I'll call it the area rather than keep referring to it as a geographical area, collaboration, has decreased by more than 25% in the last 25 years. Despite this, and we're sort of head-scratching a little bit over this as to why, but despite this, carbon still seems to be being sequestered to the deep at similar levels as it has been prior to that, indicating that this may be being done by different species such as bacteria, rather than the planktonic community. So there's some research needs to be done there. Some research needs to be done there. And yeah, well, that's going to be one of the gaps that we will identify. Food webs generally are being restructured, and there's a change in species distribution, and these are occurring mainly, we feel, due to climate pressures. Moving on, the Sargassum itself, as most of you probably know, acts as the basis of a whole unique ecosystem. It supports several endemic species. The figures 30 to 40 endemic species that you don't find anywhere else, I think springs to mind. And it acts as an important nursery for fish and turtles within and moving through that region. The rafting communities of Sargassum support fewer taxa now than they used to. This is, again, is one of the findings, suggesting that the food web itself is being reorganized through physical and chemical changes in the Sargasso Sea, and shifting climate appears to be shaping the habitats that these animals inhabit. So we're seeing changes to the Sargassum habitat and the species it supports with the changes that we're seeing in climate that are affecting the water chemistry effectively. In terms of threatened species, and again, you know, this is a very quick run through of a massive 500-page scientific, highly detailed scientific document. Many species rely on the Sargasso Sea, as I'm sure most of you are aware, during their life cycles, and many of them are therefore already threatened or endangered because this is the only habitat that they require during their life cycles. Further changes in the environment then could represent a tipping point for a lot of these species. It's the only spawning site for two species of endangered anguillid eel, the American and the European eel. And I think, as David said in your presentation yesterday, I believe, that we're looking at a species that is worth, on an annual basis, between 2.5 and I think it was $15 billion. Massively important economically. So, you know, that's a socio-economic finding from this socio-ecosystem diagnostic analysis. The deep sea is absolutely fascinating. We don't know the actual final depth of the Sargasso Sea, and we are planning cruises to try and rectify this, but we do know it's in places it's at least 5,000 kilometers deep. Meters, sorry, 5,000 kilometers. it'd be running through the other side of the planet, wouldn't it? Yeah. So, thank you, Jesse. Quiet, Kevin. Yes, thank you. 5,000 meters. I was trying to decide whether to say 5 kilometers or 5,000, and I got tripped up. There we go. I'm less than perfect. Damn. Extensive deep sea ecosystems. We know they're there. NOAA has done some very interesting exploratory work across the seamounts to the north of the area, as I'm calling it, through the stepping stones and various other seamounts in that area. And they do support unique deep sea biodiversity. We're finding that there are new species there that we haven't identified before. The deep sea is the Sargasso Sea's largest biosphere by far, and I think, I can't remember the exact percentages, but somewhere, it represents somewhere, if you include the mesopelagic as well, from sort of 400, 500 meters, not kilometers down, then you're looking at probably 80% of the Sargasso Sea or more is represented by the deep sea, from the mesopelagic right down to the benthic there. So it's the largest biosphere within the Sargasso Sea itself. Vitally important for carbon sequestration, fueled by vertical migration of mesopelagic organisms. I won't bore you too much with the details on that, but many of you who are scientists will have heard of DL migration during the course of the day, where a lot of the organisms move up to feed at night, and then they drop back down at daytime into the deeper waters and take carbon down with them. And as most organisms do, they tend to release some of that through their feces, and a lot of that gets sequestered down there. And I think you mentioned the figure earlier, didn't you, that in terms of the carbon pump, this area, the Sargasso Sea, puts more than 7 times more carbon back down and sequesters more than 7 times more carbon than any other high seas areas that we're aware of. But then we do have the data, which helps. So, and the deepest depths remain poorly studied. I mean, that was the one big thing that came out. Alex isn't here with us. Alex Rogers wrote a lot of the stuff on the benthic. Climate-driven changes are altering the sargassum distribution, as I think I said earlier, the habitat structure and the nursery functions. But the Sargasso Sea still acts as a hub to the Atlantic, and its ecosystem services need to be conserved. And when I say acts as a hub, I'll mention this in a minute, but this is about connectivity, both vertical connectivity and the horizontal connectivity within the area, but way out of the area into the Caribbean and the North Atlantic and even across to the Canary Islands, etc. And the deepest depths remain poorly studied. I think I said that earlier. In terms of shipping, extensive and increasing shipping traffic crosses the Sargasso Sea on an all-round year basis. There are risks to wildlife, including potential and actual ship strikes, particularly on cetaceans. Underwater noise, which also affects a lot of the migratory species going through the region. Potential oil spills and pollution from things like ballast water exchange and biofouling on the ships themselves, which can introduce exotic species. And the threats may significantly affect marine species, but the impacts are poorly quantified. We need more information on it. And you'll see there on the right some of the number of reported strikes to cetaceans. Then well, I've just wasted another minute listening to you. Yes, but we have lost the causal chain. We do get on most of the time, of course. Yeah, so we have the North Atlantic humpback whale migratory corridor established by as an IMMA by IUCN. You can see there, this was done through the Marine Mammal Protected Areas Task Force. There's no particularly sensitive sea area designated to protect it or any other management tools that currently address that. And the cumulative impacts, therefore, have to be taken into account as well, not just from shipping, but from all the other impacts that are going on, like the climate change issues that I've just mentioned. But it's fair to say that the shipping industry is highly collaborative. They've been working very closely with us in stakeholder engagement strategy. Delighted to have Lloyd's here, Lloyd's Register, our friend Tahan, who's been very supportive, thank you. And indeed, some of the big players like Maersk have been extremely supportive as well. Marine fisheries, I've got fisheries experts in the room, so I have to be very careful here. Sargasso Sea fisheries account for less than 0.5% of the global high seas catch, but they are targeting ecologically important pelagic species. And the distant water fleets are mainly targeting tuna, swordfish, billfish, and tuna. And it's mainly Taiwan, Spain, and US are the main fishers. And two of those, at least, can only really do this fishery if they're subsidized, because it just doesn't make enough money for them otherwise. We're worried about fisheries of squid and mesopelagic fisheries. That's the lower water column below sort of 300, 400 meters. Because it's unregulated. The existing RFMOs, ICAT, which is the Tuna, Atlantic Tuna Commission, and NAFO, which is the North Atlantic Fisheries Organization, neither of those are responsible for management of squid or mesopelagic fisheries. So potentially it's a free-for-all, and there's a lot of interest being shown in this. So we're worried about that. Shark, turtle, and seabird bycatch are a major concern. Fishing down the chain is a major concern because both of the RFMOs really focus on the target species, but they don't consider the prey species as well. And if they lose the prey species, then obviously you get a collapse in the chain. Ecosystem-based management approaches to fisheries are needed. We have two observers, one on NAFO and one on ICAT, and they are pushing hard on trying to get both RFMOs to adopt a more ecosystem-based management approach. The eel fishery, it's the only spawning ground that we know of for endangered European and American anguillids. Catches have fallen since 1960 by, you can see on the right-hand side there, by 80%. There's a huge demand for glass eels. This is the very early stage of the eels, which look like glass because you can see through them. And the demand for that is really for aquaculture because they can't breed them in captivity, so they capture them that age. And then they're taken to primarily Asia, the Far East, where they're grown out and then sold as adult eels for consumption. They face the threats in their inshore life stage, so that's outside of the Sargasso Sea, when they're trying to swim into the areas and the rivers, the freshwater areas, where they then mature. And the sort of pressures they're up against are destruction of habitat, where the rivers aren't clean anymore, or dams have been built across, hydropower, etc., and they just can't get back to their adult stations. So, smuggling is huge. It's valued at 2.5 billion euros a year, but as always with smuggling, that will be an undervalue because that's the stuff we know about, and smuggling is designed specifically for you not to know about it. So, as I say, they face threats in their inshore life stage, pollution in the rivers and change in the actual rivers themselves, but also climate change is affecting the coastal waters too. And recovery depends on cooperation across the eel life cycle. So that's not just within the Sargasso Sea, but it's right the way up to the maturing stage and then before they swim back out to spawn again. So it's an issue of connectivity. Seabed activities, current seabed activities are limited, but deep sea mining could pose a potential future risk because there are polymetallic sulfides and cobalt-rich crusts present. So extraction could have catastrophic effects in terms of habitat destruction and pollution, and the impacts, because it's deep, could be very long-lasting. The Sargasso Sea, as it says there, is biologically and physically connected. So we've been talking about connectivity, and it's really important when you talk about BBNJ, the whole connectivity issue. It's connected through ecosystems right across the Atlantic. Ocean currents and migratory species connect multiple regions for eels, turtles, sharks, seabirds, marine mammals, etc. And mesopelagic organisms dominate the biomass and transport carbon to depth through daily vertical migration. That's what I said earlier. So it's really important carbon pump area for the whole of the world is the Sargasso Sea. Protecting this is critical for effective conservation and broader Atlantic ecosystem health through major knowledge gaps. Though major knowledge gaps remain, and connectivity in the deep sea is one of the biggest knowledge gaps we have, especially deep sea processes that we still don't entirely understand. Global changes, the emerging threats, globally significant ecosystem, it is, definitely. It's facing increasing human impacts. We know that ocean conditions are being reshaped by climate change. Resilience and productivity, as I showed you earlier, under oceanography is decreasing. Shifts in food webs and widespread pollution threaten ecosystem stability. And really the conclusion is that this is a sentinel ecosystem, and I think that's even captured in the Hamilton II Declaration, that very word, that it should be treated as a sentinel ecosystem for climate ocean changes, and highlights the overall global need for precautionary ecosystem-based management, but particularly in the Sargasso Sea for strengthened stewardship within the BBNJ framework. Overall conclusions then from the CEDA, it's an ecologically unique, globally significant ecosystem, but it's increasingly vulnerable to cumulative human and climate pressures that I've mentioned. This highlights the need for stronger stewardship and more coordinated conservation measures. I don't think anybody would really argue with that. And the whole Sargasso Sea initiative provides a prototype for high seas ecosystem governance. And by the initiative, I mean the Sargasso Sea Commission itself, the Hamilton Declaration signatories, and indeed the UNDP GEF Strengthening Stewardship Project, all working together to try and move this ahead. And the good news, because it always has to be some good news, surely, from CEDA to SAP. The CEDA, and I've heard this statement made by quite a number of people, including in GEF, it represents a gold standard for capturing the best available science for a high seas ecosystem. Stakeholder engagement and peer review has been forefronted, and we got very close engagement stakeholders thanks to a dedicated stakeholder engagement team. Can I call you a commercial team? I think I can, yes. Yeah. It provides a firm and reliable foundation from which to negotiate a strategic action program that adopts formally endorsed stewardship actions and conservation measures.
Before you change, you can get back, but that was the people attending 12 years ago today.
Oh, right, yes.
Those are all the participants in the Hamilton Declaration original meeting 12 years ago today, 12th of March.
Yeah, it's very gratifying.
11th of March.
I don't know what's going on here. I'm sorry about this. So, in developing a strategic action program, that is the next step, which we're literally taking right now. The CEDA's identified the ecosystem environmental and socio-economic status and trends and the priority problems as I've been through them. So the next step after that has been to develop what we call a causal chain analysis, which has identified what are the actual environmental and socio-economic impacts, socio-ecosystem and socio-economic impacts, in terms of what the immediate ones, what are the underlying ones, and what are the root causes. And very often root causes comes back to inadequate governance, inadequate conservation measures, and nobody having responsibility for conservation and stewardship effectively. That was followed by an ecosystem valuation, which we've now finished and which you're going to hear about this afternoon, which looked at what is the value of the ecosystem globally, not just the ecosystem as it sits, but it has a massive global value in terms of goods and services, carbon sequestration, etc. And how will that alter with improved stewardship? So if we can introduce improved stewardship and conservation, how can we protect the value of the ecosystem? But most importantly and pragmatically, what is that actually going to cost to introduce that? You know, there's a cost, obviously, to having improved stewardship and conservation. So these are the primary steps then that guide the negotiation and adoption of a strategic action program, which, as I say, we're now literally just starting on. And as soon as we leave here, we'll be well into it. So the next steps, it sets out what is a strategic action program. It sets out the specific actions required by all of the partners and players in order to address those impacts and threats. Outlines any of the institutional improvements required, policy requirements, legal requirements, and very importantly, investments needed to resolve these ecosystem problems. And I'm pleased to say that we are getting a lot of interest already from investors who want to support science and research in the region to try and close some of the gaps that we've identified. Once the SAP has been agreed, then we will seek technical assistance, capacity building and investment projects that we can develop around it. We expect to deliver the draft of this by the end of this year, which GEF will be waiting to see keenly. And we hope to have a final agreement on that draft by early 2027, not mid-2027, because we intend then, and I think I might say that in my final slide, no I don't, but I will say it anyway, we intend then to present this back to GEF for the GEF 9 Council meeting, which will be in July of next year, to basically say, haven't we done a good job? Now will you help us by supporting us with another 4 or 5 years to implement this strategic action program and look at all these partners we brought in and all this co-funding and financing we brought in. Keep your fingers crossed. I hope that's the way it's going to go. But thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you, David. And sorry for the barracking from the back. I was aware of that. We're disappointed if you haven't. Keeping to form. So my next job is to introduce our next speaker. Right, sorry, it is difficult to hold. I apparently was told off for doing this before, so I have to keep the microphone well up. To introduce our next speaker, who's Eddie Intervice, who's done the economic assessment. So I'm hoping he's here. Eddie, welcome. Nice to see you.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, brilliant. Thank you.
Excellent.
And so we'll ask for your slides to be put up. And will you control them, or if you just say next slide, I think our team can move on to the next one for you. So over to you.
Yeah, hello. I just wonder how to share. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent. So hello, everybody, from a mild evening in Athens, Greece. I would like to start with a personal note. First, on the more pessimistic side, We live in times of war and of innocent people being killed and disrespect of international law. So in one sense, what difference does it make if we talk about BBNJ agreement and international cooperation? But I'll give it a positive spin because I'm a positive person. Maybe that's exactly the times where it's our responsibility as experts, scientists, policymakers, etc., to continue working and continue hoping for more and better international cooperation based on facts and figures and information that we have. But I wanted to share this thoughts because I think to completely ignore what's happening out there is a little bit difficult. I hope it's okay. So coming to my presentation, the main title is Findings of the Ecosystem Valuation Work we did. But I did put a slightly bigger one, which builds on also what David Woutsen said on assessing economic value also for advancing ecosystem conservation and stewardship in the Sargasso Sea. So an ecosystem valuation exercise is basically just a starting point. What we want to actually get to, and I'll talk about this more later, is from an socioeconomics point of view, what are the costs and benefits of different stewardship options? I'll start very basic, but probably all of you have heard of ecosystem services. Many and varied benefits that humans obtain from natural environment and from properly functioning ecosystem. 2 points I would like to mention here because sometimes there is a little bit of misunderstanding. Very important is the non-use and existence and option values. So it is an anthropocentric concept, but there are ways to include also this non-use existence values, which in my view are very important. And another one is when we talk about ecosystem services is that we talk about a well-functioning ecosystem. So if you have a dead ecosystem that produces values, these are strictly speaking no ecosystem services. So if the values created through shipping or mineral extraction are, as I said, strictly speaking, no ecosystem services. At the same time, very important, when we want to support decision-making and the relevant assessment, of course, these activities and values are of huge importance. These are just 2 points I would like to clarify right from the start. I kidnap you on land. Ecosystem services do have a matter of personal viewpoints, also, especially when we talk about non-use values. There is huge literature and so on, structuring and giving the full picture of it. But here again, just to mention and to illustrate that it does have also personal perceptions behind it. Why should we do this valuation stuff? It can play, and I think important is the can, an important role for identifying measures and strategies, especially revealing hidden trade-offs between users and making them explicit. So the starting point is to understand what is the value of the current ecosystem services in a specific area, for example, the Sargasso Sea. But then maybe the most useful part is this scenario building and assessment of different options. Having said that, my experience since I've been doing this stuff for 25 years, also what we did now to estimate the current ecosystem services values is extremely important for communication perspective and for achieving buy-in in the protection. Just by showing policymakers that this strange thing out there that's called Sargasso Sea in our case does produce and does have important values connected to it. You've been talking already 2 days about the BBNJ agreement. I mean, of course, the process in the Sargasso Sea, the SAP preparation phase is very timely for us to come in with an ecosystem services valuation with early support. But also, as said, the BBNJ treaty agreement can be fed by various aspects coming from ecosystem service valuation and of socioeconomic assessments overall. We heard about the ABMTs, high seas NPAs, but also the environmental impact assessments. Just one more side note here. I found the discussion almost amusing, if it wasn't a bit sad. If we need economists in BBNJ agreement implementation, okay, maybe I'm an economist, so I see it differently, but I wonder how we can improve high seas area stewardship management without looking at the economic aspects of it. So it's quite an interesting point. Exactly. I think values can give us something to hold on in difficult times, especially. So what was the approach we took for the valuation study? A realistic one. As always, economists come in quite late, time and resource constraints. Of course, limited data availability, especially for non-use values. So we did focus on key ecosystem services where we had also sufficient available information. I will not go into the methodological issues. I just want to mention that there's Jeff and International Waters Learn network, IV Learn network guidance that we used on how to value ecosystem services. I put the link on there. Maybe someone is interested to have a look more.
If I
on the
just
methodological
interrupt you a
sides.
moment, Eddie, you haven't
Something
told us
that
to
we
move
also
your slides forward.
touched upon.
Sorry, this is David.
Sorry?
You haven't told us to move your slide forward, so we're still on your opening slide.
Oh.
You want us to move forward? We're relying on you to tell us when to move them.
Something changed here. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I thought I shared the screen. Okay. Now they move, right? So you missed all my funny cartoons. That's pity. So we are here, right? You can see it. Overall approach. Hello? Can you see my slide now?
Yes, everything's
approach,
working
David?
and you've got control. I think you're okay, so go. Please, go on.
Okay. Sorry about that. So, yes. So, what approach we took? We did also some brief analysis on the list of main beneficiaries of these ecosystem service values, as well as a fast assessment of the values for each group, local, regional, but also international level. I think that links also to the equity discussions that took place the 2 last days. But as said, I will not present too much on that because it was just a brief assessment. Methodologically, key additional challenge, obviously, is that we're talking about a high seas area. And that's something that very seldom has been done to this extent like we did it. So we did have to adapt our methodology to our specific area. Now I move to the next slide. I hope it works. So some main results, again, slightly afraid since I heard we have a lot of fisheries experts here, but I'll be just very brief. Some estimate of 15 to 100 million per year value in catches, mainly of this key species, tuna, swordfish, blue sharks, and eels. Depends on what data are included. On eels, we did, as David too said, look at beyond the specific ecosystem looking at, for example, the combined market value of eels at least 62 million per year. Regarding tourism and recreation, due to the location of it, we included the Bermuda tourism sector with 414 million of expenditure. At the same time, including sports, recreational fishing, whale, bird, and turtle watching. At the same time, the global values, meaning which of these touristic recreation activities depend also on the Sargasso Sea well functioning. We know it's ecologically vital, but economically very difficult to quantify, so we didn't put a number on that. Carbon sequestration was mentioned, absorption of CO2 through biological physical processes, and a very high value of 2.4 to 15.3 billion per year. Different absorption rates assumed, that's why the big difference. And again, as already mentioned, approximately 7% of the global biological carbon pump, although the Sargasso Sea area covers just 1.1% of ocean surface. I think this corresponds to the number that we heard. Oxygen production, methodologically quite difficult, quite many uncertainties, so we didn't put a monetary estimate on it, although considered very important, as well as some numbers available on education and research related to the Sargasso Sea that also have secondary economic benefits of 13 to 14 million per year in the Bermuda research sector. Now, the important point that I already raised, existence and biodiversity value. We started up with Constanza et al., which is just a proxy, but did some benefit transfer estimations based on the JFIW Learn guidance, which shows high existence and cultural values for the Sargasso Sea. So an overall number, because I think some, especially policymakers, like this overall number thing. From a scientific point of view, of course, it's at the lower end. What we did is a lower boundary estimation of 2.7 to 15.5 billion per year for the Sargasso Sea. Probably much higher, but we basically stayed on the conservative side. And it's important, and you will find that in the relevant study, which is basically done just last round of comments. You will see that we very explicitly state all the assumptions that we had to take in order to reach this number. So it's such a number cannot normally just be read by itself, but does have to be connected to the assumptions that are behind it. So overall, we can say it's a lot of money associated to it for different aspects. It's a partial picture that we give. And one of the results is that more accurate and more justified economic valuation will be important for the next steps of stewardship measures, especially if we move towards the issue of scenario building. When we didn't go that far, because it's also maybe a bit early in the SAP preparation process, what kind of measures could we take? What conservation and stewardship? The point is to build a basis that can, at a later stage, provide estimates of the costs and benefits of different options. So we try to start with this initial step. For that, in order to have a baseline based on the scientific, the hard science behind it, we set up a scenario saying that if by 2075 we don't do additional measures, a lot of bad things will happen: biodiversity collapse, reduced fishery shields, tourism decline, and so on and so on. So that's the starting point. We didn't get much further into what the specific areas for action are or what specific actions. The point is that when these are put on the table in the scientific policy interface, in the development, we could come in as economists, socio-economists, to assess the costs and benefits of these different options. Oops. Yeah. So just one more slide, and I'd like to open up a bit the issue. I said I think that economics, socioeconomics do present a key element of scientific knowledge, because another statement I heard today that made me slightly smile is up to now we focused a lot on science, but we also need economics. I put it a bit in brief terms. Yeah, I think economics are also science. So it's rather the hard science versus social science and humanities. And they definitely, I believe, in BBNJ agreement implementation will have to have a higher role than what we see up to now. What can it provide? Orientation, system knowledge? Yes, we do have some things, and definitely we can do more, but especially on the transformation knowledge. As we heard today, how do we take action? What works in different contexts? So I see economics as being part of this policy and governance science issue. And so especially for the Sargasso Sea, as said, when we have measures on the table, we could contribute with supporting information on what the costs and benefits are for these options. And since the Sargasso is the gold standard right now for BBNJ implementation, I think that's something that we could look at. Thanks a lot, and sorry for the hiccup with the slides. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Eddie. David, I think we've got time to show the. We've got an hour and 20 minutes, so I think we've done 25. Yeah.
Maybe you were hitting them with an awful lot of information.
Do we want to take a break for some questions then at this point? Eddie will join us here, so do you want to?
Thanks, Eddie.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. Do you want to see how we get on with questions? But we have got another. It overran a bit, so it's about a little bit more than 15 minutes on the causal chain analysis. Shall I run it? Will they be interested? Yes? Yeah? There seems to be? Okay.
We've got time.
All right. Yeah. Please, then, if we can. Thanks very much, Katie.
I mean, it's a nice job done by Andrew
Yeah.
Hudson, which I think some of
Yeah.
you know is,
So thank you. So we will be to questions, Eddie, of your controversial comments, I'm sure.
Don't go away.
Yes, that's right. Thanks. We've done the science, now we do the economics. I feel the same because I'm a lawyer, so.
It's interesting, Eddie, if you can hear me. It's David here. Exactly what you mentioned came up this morning. I think it was this morning in discussions about the science and technical body and how that science and technical body has to also include experts on economics, not just the science as we think of it, as the biology, the physics, the chemistry, etc., etc. So you were bang on target with that, because that came up this morning and everybody was very much in agreement that in order for the BBNJ agreement to move ahead in terms of science and technical advice, there has to be economics involved in it. And I think you've made that very clear in your presentation. Thanks.
So we're just waiting for them to put the causal chain.
Hello and good afternoon, everyone. And I'm pleased to join you at the symposium.
So we can hear Andy, but we can't see him. No, get rid of Eddie. I'll put you in the background.
Unfortunately, I couldn't be there.
He's in New York City too, which is quite cold.
I think someone has to take me off screen. I can do it.
All right.
Hello and good afternoon, everyone. And I'm pleased to join you at the symposium. Unfortunately, I couldn't be there in person, but through the miracles of computers, I'm able to present the causal chain analysis to you today. This is, of course, the causal chain analysis for the Sargasso Sea project. This is derived from the Sargasso Sea SEDA, or Socio-Economic Diagnostic Analysis. In essence, the SEDA, one of its key outcomes and outputs is to identify the key threats to the ecosystem, then to in turn identify what the potential and actual impacts of those threats are, both at the environmental level but also at the socio-economic level. It identifies the immediate causes. What's the immediate cause of that problem? Is it overfishing? Is it a specific pollutant that's coming into the system? And then, even more important, it tries to trace back these immediate causes to what are known as their root causes. And in general, root causes mean those that are traced mainly to human systems, that is, various, you could say, societal failures. It could be governance failure, policy failure, regulatory failure, an economic failure, an externality issue. And the idea there, of course, is that by identifying the human side of the root causes, in principle, you can identify actions to address those root causes at that level and actually have an impact on addressing your problem. So the first threat that came out of the SEDA was basically the threat to the overall environmental status and really the oceanographic stability of the Sargasso Sea. And in principle, the main threat identified here is, of course, climate change. And we know well the threats of climate change to the ecosystem: warming of the ocean, deoxygenation, acidification, increased surface salinity, increased surface CO2. And then the environmental impacts that can lead to water column stratification that can change nutrient supply to the surface waters, which in turn can impact primary productivity, in turn impact zooplankton productivity, and basically disrupt the entire food web of the system, really alter the habitat quite markedly in some cases. There's also evidence that the current regime, particularly the AMOC, may be weakening a few decades. Socioeconomic impacts of this kind of broad climate-driven reduction in the integrity of the ecosystem. We could see loss of fishery yields and associated profitability for the industry, reduced tourism on some of the tourism aspects that depend on a healthy Sargasso ecosystem, and lastly, the pretty well documented increase in extreme weather events that climate change is in fact driving. So the immediate understood here, it's the accumulation of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere that are altering the temperature, the pH, the salinity, and even the circulation of the ocean. The root cause is, in effect, in one sentence, that the overall externality of climate change has not been fully, or certainly properly, fully integrated into global and local level energy policy and fossil fuels, regulatory regimes. Okay, the next threat identified was threats to endemic or ecosystem-dependent species, so certain species that are threatened in the Sargasso. We know that at least 127 different species of fish reside in the Sargasso, at least various stages in their life cycle. And we know that these kind of habitat changes may be affecting key species: turtles, eels, sharks, mesopelagic species, all of which depend on the Sargasso Sea during all or part of their life cycle. The environmental impacts could include loss of biodiversity and ecosystem function, changes in the trophic balance of the system, and even reduce carbon sequestration. For example, if certain prey species decline, that can have knock-on effects on other species, predators, obviously in particular. This is particularly of concern for both the mesopelagics that are being either exploited or being considered, and squid. And then lastly, the climate-driven distributional shifts can create spatial mismatches between predators and prey, affecting their ability to survive. Socioeconomic impacts can include declines in fisheries, declines in ecotourism, and the livelihoods of people affected. For example, those who work in the upstream world, capturing and selling elvers and glass eels. And then it's the general knock-on effects throughout the food chain when certain species life cycles, populations, and so forth are impacted. The immediate causes of these kinds of threats are the rising temperatures, again, due to climate change, acidification, changes in currents, but also, of course, overfishing and the depletion of certain prey species. The root cause, again, comes up again and again, is the generally weak integration of the climate externality into the various geographic levels of policy, the economic frameworks of these systems. And in general, a lack of ecosystem-based management and inadequate fisheries governance. Okay, another threat was the threats to the deep water column and the seabed ecosystems. Some of these threats include deep sea fishing, both existing and potential future, trawling among them, pollution, but in particular that due to lost and abandoned fishing gear, which can damage the fragile benthic systems, and even climate change impacts, which can pervade into the deeper waters, including through acidification, changes in carbon supply to the deep ocean, and so forth. The environmental impacts, of course, if you trawl or fish on seamounts, you're going to have, you can get significant destruction of the habitat, loss of species, disruption in the food web, changes in the carbon export to the deep sea, oxygen depletion, increased acidity, which of course would impact some of the key carbonate forming species that reside there. Socioeconomic impacts, you might see short-term, maybe modest profits from some of these deep sea fisheries, but those could easily be followed by collapse of the fisheries. For example, the Alfonsino example. And you can have knock-on ecosystem effects on both the prey and or the predators of some of these new target species, overall loss of biodiversity, and again, reduce carbon sequestration value of the system. The immediate causes, again, accumulation of anthropogenic greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, subsidized fishing, which encourages expansion into ABNJ areas like the Sargasso and to the associated deep sea areas, and the use of certain kinds of deep water trawl gear. The root causes, subsidies to high seas fishing, poor regulation of that fishing, the absence of an effective ecosystem-based approach to fisheries, insufficient enforcement, weak climate policy integration into both policy and economic systems. Okay, the next main threat identified was shipping. So the potential threats, well understood, ship strikes, particularly of cetaceans, the introduction of invasive species from either ballast water or biofouling, pollution from ships, oil, chemical, etc., underwater noise, a new and quite serious issue, and general physical disturbance can occur to the Sargasso mats. The environmental impacts, of course, can include both injury and mortality of cetaceans, the introduction of invasive species, which can quite seriously perturb an ecosystem, stress of noise, not just on cetaceans, but on other species, damage specifically to the Sargassum habitat, the impacts of certain ship-derived pollutants, toxics on the ecosystem and on species, on everything from growth, reproduction, and so forth. Socioeconomic impacts could include, of course, loss in whale watching revenue if the whale populations are depleted, alien invasive species, they can target key food chain species, affecting fisheries both up and down the food chain. And lastly, the potential for human health risks if seafood is accumulating selected pollutants, including potentially plastics that can have risks to human that consume that seafood. The immediate causes of these threats generally seems to be a lack, certainly, of state-of-the-art ship strike avoidance opportunities and mechanisms, the potential for the unintentional introduction of invasive species, inadequate ship waste management, lack of effective noise mitigations from ship, and the use of these open loop scrubbers. The root causes relate in general to insufficient maritime legislation and or the weak enforcement of existing maritime conventions, the lack of economic incentives for cleaner shipping, the inadequate port facilities, for example, with closed loop collection scrubbers, in general, weak or infrequent use by ship designers of the fairly new 2023 IMO guidelines that are aimed at reducing underwater noise, and of course these being voluntary guidelines at this point. Okay, the next major threat identified is to the marine fishery sector, and here we're talking mainly the pelagic fisheries. We know about 5 of the 11 main target species are considered overfished at some level, but bycatch has emerged in the CETA as one of the main issues, and the potential for the beginning of unregulated targeting of some new mesopelagic / deep sea species. Environmental impacts of overfishing, of course, can include stock depletion. Bycatch can affect the broader trophic webs, for example, by removing apex predators from the ecosystem, particularly like sharks. Overall impact on the ecosystem biodiversity. Squid and mesopelagics are considered very important prey for tuna, some of the tuna and tuna-like species, and they also have a role in carbon sequestration. So any impacts on those species could have knock-on effects on other levels of the trophic system. Socioeconomic impacts, of course, you can end up having declining catches some of your main target species that would reduce income in the fishery sector, reduce food security, and even possibly lead to collapse of certain recreational and or commercial fisheries. Immediate cause, of course, is overfishing, is weak bycatch control and monitoring, no effective assessment of the impacts on the broader ecosystem, on how these kinds of overfishing activities can have broader effects on other species and levels in the ecosystem, in the trophic system. In the absence of observers or onboard systems to monitor catch and bycatch. The root causes, subsidies, obviously subsidies that feed increase activity in the high seas, such as Sargasso. Again, the lack of a truly ecosystem approach to fisheries, insufficient legal and financial incentives to put in the kinds of monitoring that's really needed, and no real-time mechanism to assess the level of fishing effort and the catch. Most of the analysis that are done are retrospective. So next, of course, the key threat was identified related to the catadromous fisheries, and in particular, of course, the eels that migrate to both the North America and to Europe and to Africa. The threats, well understood, there are various, in particular, riverine migration barriers, hydropower systems, dams, thermal power plants, but also pollution, various toxics that are introduced into rivers in particular, disease, over-harvesting of eel populations, poaching, and climate change impacts. Climate change, of course, is not just impacting the ocean, it's impacting rivers too, and that can in turn affect the ability of eels to meet their metabolic, reproductive, and other functions. Environmental impacts, of course, the migration of the eels can be interrupted, or in fact, there can be mortality of eels in some of these barriers. Genetic loss, disruption in the food web, disruption at the species metabolic level, and the restocking of eels into rivers from aquaculture facilities can lead to the introduction of parasites and also, of course, reduce the overall genetic diversity of the system. Socioeconomic impacts can include, in principle, the collapse of the eel fisheries in North America and Europe, leading to reduced revenue, losses to the communities that depend on this sector, this revenue, and this general collapse of eel revenue across the various range states. Immediate causes are these hydropower dams, the pollution, the illegal fishing, and the aquaculture disease transfer. The root causes are often insufficient regulation of the riverine habitat, river basin management, integrated water resources management, and so forth, and in general, insufficient regulations and enforcement of this sector, the eel harvesting sector. And lastly, of course, climate rears its ugly head again, that the climate externality is still not fully and effectively integrated into policy and economic frameworks. Okay, the next threat relates to seabed activities, primarily those related to mining, but also cable installation. You have, of course, both massive sulfides on the Mid-Atlantic ridge and some polymetallic nodules in the Sargasso Sea abyssal plain that in principle could be targets for mining. You have undersea cable installation, and of course, both represent potential damage to the habitats in these areas. Environmental impacts quite diverse, everything from surface and deep sea sediment plumes, release of toxic metals and substances, specific species loss at the mining areas, sediment smothering, increasing levels of nutrients and metals, which can either cause mortality or affect the metabolic functioning of certain species, light and sound pollution, and generally an overall reduction in biodiversity and the functioning of the ecosystem. Socioeconomic impacts can include decline in selected fisheries impacted by the mining and reduced revenue, and just general loss in biodiversity, ecosystem services and their values, and so forth. The immediate cause, of course, would be the actual physical harvesting of seabed minerals, and in particular mining for some of the key metals that are being sought for batteries, things like cobalt, nickel, copper, and manganese, and of course the installation and or upkeep and repair of deep underwater cables. The root cause, in particular in the current frame of the world energy system, is dramatically increasing global demand for some of the key renewable energy minerals, many of which are found in these deep sea resources, such as I said, cobalt, copper, manganese, and nickel. Gaps in regulation and enforcement, and particularly, as we all know, the ISA still has a mandate to deliver the regulatory framework, environmental regulatory framework for deep sea mining. Has not done that yet, but is pledged to hopefully deliver that soon. And then even with that, there's several countries and companies have called for a global moratorium on deep sea mining until more understanding is garnered, and that moratorium will only be adhered to by those who commit to it. Okay, pollution, and here talking mainly about pollution either from the continent, which would be primarily through atmospheric transport and deposition, and or ocean, primarily ship-derived chemical and plastic pollution. Environmental impacts of a wide range of pollutants, everything from eutrophication, specific toxicity, ingestion of plastics from the micro level right up to the macro level, bioaccumulation of microplastics in selected species, overall degradation of water quality and the habitats that can impact on everything from species breeding, predator-prey interactions, migration, and so forth. The socioeconomic impacts, everything from fisheries and tourism losses, potential human health risks from ingestion of polluted seafood. The immediate causes on the continental side, emissions of NOx, NOx from power plants and other sources, climate-driven variations in the supply of iron to the North Atlantic from the Saharan dust can affect primary productivity in the Sargasso, dumping or in an unintentional loss of plastics into the oceans from shipping, particularly from the fishery sector, and generally, weak or poor waste management on the high seas. The root causes are either weak or regulation and enforcement on NOx emissions at the continental level. The global plastics treaty process, unfortunately, has been stalled. We hope that will be revitalized, but that obviously will continue to lead to a fair amount of plastics reaching the ocean from continents. And in general, with a few exceptions, there's been mostly ineffective or not successful policy practices to reduce continentally derived plastics, things like container deposit laws, and introducing the principle of extended producer responsibility. And then lastly, also similarly, lack of incentives, things like fishing gear deposit schemes and traceable gear to minimize the loss of fishing gear and that its appearance as a pollutant in the ocean. Okay, the last threat is that related to connectivity. The Sargasso is clearly a highly connected ecosystem to areas far and beyond the Sargasso itself, both to the continental coastal zone, coastal areas, but also, of course, through the connection with the eel, migration patterns and spawning patterns to the entire, really, not entire, but large areas of river basin drainage in both North America and the European and African continents to the Atlantic. So it's a highly linked system. Some of the potential threats related to this connectivity issue include disruption of ecological linkages between the Sargasso and the coastal systems. There are many fish species that may inhabit both areas in different parts of their life cycle. Bycatch in the Sargasso could impact coastal fisheries. We could see reduction in vertical carbon sequestration, and even the long distance shipping noise can penetrate hundreds or even thousands of miles, and that may impact organisms beyond the technical boundaries of the Sargasso Sea. Environmental impacts, you can see disturbance of these ABNJ areas for the spawning or nurturing of juvenile life stages, changes in migration patterns, nutrient cycling, and so forth. Specific damage to seamounts, causing that damage. Noise can, of course, affect the ability of cetaceans to communicate, particularly over long distance. That can affect their feeding, their migration, their reproduction cycles, and so forth. And even the changes in the deal vertical migration of planktonic organisms may be happening. Socioeconomic impacts of these connectivity-related threats include reduced fisheries yields, impacts on migratory species, some of which distant coastal communities could depend on, decline in the carbon sink and the economic value of that, and just general and broad loss of ecosystem services. The immediate cause, again, accumulation of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, overfishing, bycatch, ship noise pollution, and generally an inadequate understanding and attention to an integration, incorporation of this important connectivity linkages and threats in the Sargasso and adjacent areas. The root cause, again, climate change still is not sufficiently fully integrated into global and local policy and economic frameworks. There's an insufficient policy, regulatory enforcement of the fisheries sector, insufficient policy and financial incentives for bycatch avoidance, insufficient policy and financial incentive to reduce pollution and other risks. And lastly, the general and overall need for improved high seas and transboundary governance in the incorporation and implementation of a truly integrated ABNJ management strategy. So thank you for your attention. It was a pleasure to share this with you, and I hope my colleagues in the Sargasso team can follow up and answer any questions.
Okay, well, thanks. Unfortunately, isn't there the clause, but I'll pass that on. So thanks very much to Andy Hudson for doing that. So we do have half an hour left. So we've got good time for questions. Are we supposed to finish 4:30? 4. All right. Well, we're over time. We can take a couple of questions though, if you're prepared to. Is there a couple? Yeah, please, Matt.
I've got one on the messaging around. Oh, sorry. It's a question around the messaging around the socioeconomics, because we put a value on the stuff we know, and and that was a really nice analysis. But of course, there's loads that we don't know in the Sargasso Sea, and once we go out to other high seas areas, there's even more gaps in our knowledge. So how do we have a narrative that suggests that there's a not yet known, an unquantifiable value, a potential value? That's the word I'm looking for, really, because there's always a risk that we think it's really impressive. We valued this at whatever $1 billion, but it could be worth 10 or 100 times that amount. We just don't know yet. So what's the narrative around that message?
Yes, you're looking at me as you ask the question, but I'm hoping that Eddie is listening. Eddie, are you on? You want to have a shot at that? I hope he hasn't. You are still there, right?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, did you hear the question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I did. We need smart argumentation, I guess. It's a fact that even in the Sargasso Sea, where we know more than at the other high seas areas, there is a lot we don't know. We should not restrain ourselves to communicating only hard numbers. That's the first part. And the other one is that even the limited picture we can produce does raise a lot of high values. So, of course, it could be even more important in this power game of decision making if we had higher numbers, but already the ones we have, I think we can build arguments around those. Also, when we compare the costs and benefits in that relation of specific measures, I think or I hope, because I'm an optimist, that the costs will be significantly lower in many cases, even compared to the benefits we get with this restricted view we have. That's my hope. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. And my question is nodding. We can take a couple of questions. I mean, I think one of the points, if I may make, that comes out from this is that this is probably one of the most intensively studied high seas areas. We know more probably about the Sargasso Sea than we do of other high seas areas. So the bar for this is, if with everybody's tolerance, we perhaps take another question. Yes, yep, please.
Thanks, David. It's more of a suggestion. I noted this analysis all based on the ecosystem services value. So have you also considered, or in future planning, to think about what would be the cost of disruption to the ocean-based industries of a potential management actions? I noted the term cost of increased stewardship, but I didn't understand fully. It was in the first two presentation. That's by the David, okay? David did that one. Just to understand, because at some point, this question will be raised, and then the speculation started to appear. It's probably good to have that narrative in the hand, and also for the industry to understand if there is a price to pay, and what would be that price, and whether it's worth of paying. And then it can also help them to de-risk the compliance, thinking about like which areas within the industry is more affected, and which regulation they need to be, or which operation action they need to be prioritized on. So it's overall could provide more benefit if that side of the cost analysis is included in your future planning. So yeah, just a thought. Thank you.
Can I directly take this one?
Yeah, I think you can, Eddie. Let me just jump in with an observation here, and then we'll bounce. Let me just jump in with an observation here, and then I'll bounce it across to you to respond. Hassan, as you probably know, we're working very closely with BIMCO, which represents, 70% of the world's shipping. And they have done something similar, if I remember rightly, in the thermal dome, looking at the potential cost of actually reducing speed, ships reducing speed, or even actually reducing their routing, or changing their routing, should I say. And BIMCO has very kindly offered, sorry, the microphone, sorry Eddie, the microphone keeps failing on me. BIMCO has very kindly offered to do the same thing for us in the Sargasso Sea. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. If I get your point right, there would be a cost to some of these things. But Eddie, would you like to answer that as well?
Yes, even if you're not a good rapper, I didn't really hear you that well. But let's say on the question, I fully agree with the issue. And I hope I made it clear that ecosystem services valuation is only one side of the picture. Of course, if we start looking at stewardship and measures, options to be taken, in a sense of a full cost-benefit analysis, however it's done, of course, the first order effects of the measures, the cost of implementing the measures, if it's technical measures, but also the costs in the affected sectors, of course, come into play and have to be analyzed. And even more, the second order effects, because you have employment effects and so on and so on. So I fully understand the question. Maybe I was not that clear by saying ecosystem valuations is one part, which feeds into a fuller cost-benefit analysis of management options. So I think that's very crucial and important.
Okay, thank you very much, Eddie. So we really have to finish because we lose the use of the room. My apologies for overrunning. My barracking of
was not long enough on the guide who was recorded, but we did cover all the bases. We covered all the CEDA and the causal chain analysis, and we've looked at the economic evaluation. So the next step, which we start sort of when we get home, is the development of the strategic action program. So thank you very much for your attention, and enjoy the rest of your day and rest of the conference. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eddie.
Has arranged the exclusive viewing of the ocean exhibition. So it is open now.